Welcome. Welcome to the Blauwe Zaal. Welcome to Studium Generale. Today we're going to dive into the world of graffiti. Graffiti, not graffiti, graffiti. Some claim the first graffiti were the paintings on the wall in the prehistoric caves of Lascaux, France. But that's not the graffiti we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to focus on graffiti that was born in New York City. Hip-hop, gangs, the subway, and the socio-economic side to the rise of graffiti as we know it. Some say graffiti is vandalism, but I think it's art. And speaking of which, we organized this lecture together with the art committee of the TUE. Therefore, I would like your attention for the secretary of the art committee, Britte Sloothaak.
Well, thank you, David, and welcome everyone. My name is Britte Sloothaak. I'm an art historian and I'm affiliated here at the Curatorial Research Collective at the TUE. It's at the Department of Architectural Theory. And together with David and other colleagues from architecture to physics from various different departments, we are part of the art committee. And with our sole aim to create a creative and critical and new environment for the scientific thinking here at the campus. It's nothing particularly new. It already exists, this committee, since 1964 and was initiated by the original architect of this campus, Samuel Ebden, and it was called the Commission for Monumental Decoration, which is like the Commissie voor Monumentale Versiering. And since then, it is the aim of the Art Commission from various people, from various departments, to create an artistic environment to keep each other on their toes, on their feet, and on their critical thinking. So that's also what we're doing today, stepping literally outside the arena of your own scientific realm. And for that, I just want to say thank you for bringing us to your attention and give the word back to you.
Thank you, Britte. Yep. After the lecture, we have a special treat for those interested. We're going to go on a tour to the Berenkuil, next to the campus, where annually the annual graffiti festival Step into the Arena is always being held. The organizer, Mike Dobber, will take us there and talk us through it. And Britte will also be joining us, so if you have any more questions about the art committee, you can ask her. But let me introduce our guest. She's one of the world's first female graffiti artists. She's a publicist and an urban arts consultant. Let's hear it for Aileen Middel, aka Mick la Rock. Mick, the floor, it's yours.
Well, thank you all for being here. Well, the introduction was made already, and I'm sure that most of you have understood the small things I said in Dutch. Let me go to my presentation. What I want to show you today is like a speed course in graffiti heritage. A little bit about the history, but especially about conserving graffiti, as now it has become almost 50-year-old art form, one of the longest running art disciplines of modern art history, as a matter of fact. And it is the only art form that was created by children, teenagers, and even younger, in the 70s in New York City. And most of them were teenagers without any art background. So no art college, maybe high school for arts and design, but that was about it. Let's go. So, we already know it started in New York. But that's not really true, because it did start, the art form of name writing started in different parts of the world, but in the US of A, in Philadelphia, which I will show in a minute. But we all know New York the way it is now. You know, it's gentrified, beautiful, it's clean, which used to be a little bit different. This is Williamsburg, on the other side of the, or is it the Queensboro Bridge? Anyway, you see street art on the left, some graffiti on the rooftops, nice new condos. Even the older parts of New York, this is Bed-Stuyvesant, where Biggie Smalls came from. Now it's clean, but it wasn't like that in the 70s. In the 70s, New York was about to be bankrupt, the city. There was no money for art education, and there was no money for maintaining the city. Landowners didn't make too much money from their tenants, and they just let their property burn out. They hired, what I will show later, gang members, street gangs, to put arsenic on the buildings, which you see. No running water, so people would get running water from the fire hydrants. Imagine you'd live in these buildings. And even though half of the buildings are empty and worn out, you can still see that some people still live in there. And then apartment blocks would be demolished. So young people, old people that had no money to move away from the South Bronx, but the same, what you see, the same was happening in Brooklyn as well. So you had to live in there, in that environment. And you see the debris on the floor from demolished apartment blocks. These people are playing dominoes. A lot of drug problems. Abandoned buildings became drug buildings. It's a different era. Imagine you're about a little younger than your age, but still, and you're playing basketball while your apartment is being set on fire, and you got to wear your fashion in between an environment that looks like Hamburg after the Second World War bombings, or Rotterdam after the bombings. And there were no playground, not too much. There was no money invested in facilitations for youth. So kids would just invent their own playgrounds and their own sports, which was jumping from rooftop to rooftop, or gangbanging. That's what they called it. Every block in the South Bronx had their own street gangs. And as you see, the members were sometimes as young as 9 or 8 years old. And the older members of the street gangs were very violent. So the old kids would teach violence upon the young children. And they would wear their collars, as you see, their vests, that they created themselves. They would sew it themselves, and all the decorations too. Because there was no money, kids would be very, very creative. Even the violent kids. And I'm showing you this because it's like the cradle for what later became the hip-hop movement. The gangs, the street gangs, they would write their own graffiti on the walls on their block. Here you see it's the Savage Skulls. And probably Keith 150 is a member of them. And the writers would write their names. After their names came a number. Here is Keith 150, which means he lived on the 150th Street. The problem was with the gangs that if you were from one gang, you could absolutely not enter the block that was owned by another gang, which would end up in either a beatdown, sometimes even a killing. It was like a street war happening. And for some kids that worked, the violence and the protection by the gangs. But there, of course, are a lot of kids that don't, just like now, like who wants to be a drill rapper? Who wants to be involved in that with all the knives and the guns? In my neighborhood where I have my studio, it's in the Bijlmer, the southeast area of Amsterdam. The shootings are literally in front of my studio door. And I understand that a lot of children that I teach over there don't want violence. And the same happened in New York then. So I'm going to show you now a video which shows how hip-hop was an answer to end the violence. And it's not the hip-hop that we know now. It's a different language. Let's go. I have to switch applications.
The city was on the edge of bankruptcy.
The Bronx was like a world of its own.
In the early 70s, man, crime was like the major income of the Bronx.
There were gangs literally in every corner. The violence was everywhere. You could feel the tension in the air. You could see the fights across the street. You could hear the shouts in the nighttime.
The South Bronx Fort Apache was out of control. They were running through the streets. They were burning everything. I mean, pandemonium hit.
We lost a member that they viciously murdered him out there in the street. Now it's an eye for an eye.
The Bronx was going to be bathed in blood.
How rumors spread, there was not a gang in the whole of New York that was not aware of what's happening.
It was like the movie The Warriors when the ladies on the radio talking about, hey, boppers, you got to make that move.
Let's get down to it, boppers. We're going to have to do better out there.
Peace after the treaty came instantaneous.
President Young Sinners, Vice President the Young Sinners, Vice President Young Saints.
When we gang busted, we stood in the same area. Now we are able to go here, go there, meet more people, unite with people.
Here's where the whole thing started to change. Little by little, that's when the music started to come into the deal.
Well, hip-hop came from gang culture.
Herc started something his enemies didn't want to stop. It came in the form of music.
It was more like challenging to dance now and not to fight.
You know, we made a way to have fun, and we made a way to feel like we counted, and we made a way to show the world that we actually existed.
So the gangs had their jackets with the gang names, the group name. Graffiti writers had their graffiti name painted on the backside of the jackets. Maybe you remember from the Netflix, it was like a Netflix series not so long ago, The Get Down. You find all the elements of that era in there. And now I gotta go back to my presentation. There we go. And with a graffiti jacket, you kind of have... Is that me? Oh, shit. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay, I gotta stop it. This one can go. Sorry, guys. Yep. Here we go. So as a graffiti writer, you had like a free pass to go from block to block to block that were gang-owned. And graffiti writers would make something beautiful in the city instead of just like that violence. Here are some more photos of what the city looked like. And also about the development of graffiti. As I showed you that very naive graffiti on the walls of the Savage Skull block. Like the graffiti writers would start like not a gang war, but a style war. And the style war was like that everybody wanted to make their own style better than the other one's style. So the first guy would just write like a single tag with one color. The next guy would make his own tag, but then take another color and put like a line around each letter. So the whole community goes like, oh shit, that's a great idea. And they would follow it. And then the next guy who wanted to, stand out of what was normal at that point, he would maybe put dots around it. And this is where the style wars start. And when we look at this photo, you can see that Mr. Ski does not one line, but he makes them thicker, so it becomes like a big black tag. Then Mr. Gin does the same, but he's like, hey, let me get the white can out and put a white line around my big tag. So the white line becomes an outline, and he puts the stars inside. Mr. Jaco does it the opposite around, so he takes silver or white as a fill-in and puts a highlight around it. And it continues and continues. This was around 1974. And another way to stand out of the crowd would be not going under the windows of the train, but going over the windows of the train and take it from top to bottom. And that's what we call a top to bottom piece by Stay High. And he would use the character of the saint. Long live my computer. The character of a movie a movie series that was called The Saint, and he puts it right next to his piece to enhance it. And there you see the guy himself on the left. Graffiti was done basically by children of color who were living in the deprived areas of the South Bronx. But that's what we thought. And that's how it was brought to us by the media. But in Queens, where a lot of white kids would live, the white kids would write too. Graffiti writing is a very inclusive form of art. It doesn't matter where you're from, what you look like, as long as you make real good styles. It's an art form we call about style writing, which is a better name for graffiti actually than the word graffiti. Because graffiti comes from graffitare, which is an old Italian art form of making a surface black and then scratching in the black so the original color comes through. Graffito. Anyway, New York was still bad and dangerous. And kids would tag everything, the insides of the train, the outside of the train. And you can imagine that normal people who commute from home to work to home on their 9-to-5s were not so happy. But then slowly colors came in, spray paint was discovered, not only the black and the white, but more colors. And here you see work by Cliff, who does he does arrows that swirl around his C, and an arrow coming out of the F. He puts stars on top of the I. And flames around the piece, like clouds with flames in the back. A couple of years later, Duster and Lizzie, they were a couple. And she was one of the first female graffiti artists, because graffiti is an art form done basically by men or people who identify themselves as men. So for me, as a young woman, or young girl, I was 14 when I saw these pictures for the first time. I was amazed to find out that there were at least 1 or 2 women doing this. And this, for me, was the utmost, highest level of color graffiti style writing reachable in life. And my goal was to paint New York trains. 1984. I'm showing you some work by very famous graffiti artists. Dondi. You can't imagine, because when we were young, this type of art was not considered art. And a lot of people told me always, when I was very fanatic around the age of 16, 17. Like, oh, what you do is not art. You can never go to art college with this. And somehow I kind of started believing that, some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And the same the art world would say about the works of Dondi or the other guys I'm showing. They brought it to the museums at one point around the early 80s, but it was just like for a minute and then they forgot. Nowadays, the paintings of this guy are unavailable and unaffordable. The last Dondi that was sold on an auction went for almost 200,000 euros. So it is art and it is special. Talking about the Star Wars, now I'm going to switch for one more time, so bear with me. The documentary I'm about to show is the documentary about graffiti, the one that inspired most of my generation. In 1985, the VARA broadcasted this documentary on Dutch national television, and all the kids like me that were already writing, we call graffiti painting, we call it writing. All the kids who were writing already, after they saw this one on TV, there was this explosion of graffiti in all of Holland. It was amazing. Like, that's where it started. So I hope to give you a little bit of that energy right now.
Brown and Walker, bring the train out from 16 track.
You think you're on? Somebody let me know. Will everybody in the place put a whistle in your face, screaming out and say, yo, hit it. You don't stop, or rock the rhythm that makes your finger pop. I said hip hop, thanks a lot. Come on, everybody, give me what you got. I'm gonna tell you a little story about the Sugar Hill Gang with the pound pound boogie and a big bang bang.
They call themselves writers because that's what they do. They write their names, among other things, everywhere. Names they've been given or have chosen for themselves. Most of all, they write in and on subway trains, which carry their names from one end of the city to the other. It's called bombing. And it has equally assertive counterparts in rap music and breakdancing.
Screaming out and say, I am somebody.
Graffiti writing in New York is a vocation. Its traditions are handed down from one youthful generation to the next. To some, it's art. To most people, however, it is a plague that never ends. A symbol that we've lost control.
I'm Detective Bernie Jacobs. I, in conjunction with my partner, Detective Jim McHugh, are the crime prevention coordinators for the New York City Transit Police Department. Graffiti, as the name itself, is not an art. Graffiti is the application of a medium to a surface. I will show you graffiti, such as the letters on the end of that car directly in back of me. Is that an art form? I don't know. I'm not an art critic. But I can sure as hell tell you that that's a crime.
At the Grand Concourse 149th Street station in the Bronx, graffiti writers gather at what they call the writer's bench.
They're saying that the kids run the subways, that the system is out of control, that 15 and 16-year-old kids are running the system, and that graffiti is a symbol of that.
Nah, I ain't running the system.
Hell yeah.
I'm bombing the system. They're trying to make it look like graffiti writers break windows and everything. It ain't even like that.
Yeah, you know who be doing that, man? Niggas who be high when they come from school is the ones who break the window. And it's in the graffiti artist's favor to be as cool, calm, and collected about putting his art on the train as he can. You know, he wants to get in and get out without even being noticed, except for the work that's going to come out to the public that, you know, that Monday.
Well, I gotta stop here because I'm only having 11 minutes and so much more to tell you. But you see here that graffiti writers, they don't really consider themselves as vandals because they're not breaking anything. They're just adding ink or paint to a surface. It can always be cleaned. It's like they never really trash it like real vandals who would trash like a bus stop or whatever. And it's like, even though Mr. Bernie Jacobs says it's a crime, yeah, of course, you're doing something that you're not supposed to do, but it's not a crime where you gain any financial profit from. So that makes the difference. And well, it's a whole other topic, but luckily in Dutch juridical system, graffiti is not being referred as a heavy crime. So we got the Star Wars done. And if you want, just watch the whole documentary online. You can find it on YouTube, as I just showed you. Then next to the documentary, there is the Graffiti Bible, which is subway art. Just like the documentary, very, very important. I even wear a tattoo that's dedicated to this book, because this book changed my life. I hid in my room for probably 3 weeks, just tracing all those outlines that the New York graffiti writers would, just to understand their lettering and their style, and to create my own. Other books, because I'm going to talk a little bit about conserving graffiti now, because that's my job actually these days. As graffiti, as you know, it's ephemeral. Like, we paint, but tomorrow it can be gone. Maybe a piece lasts for 2 weeks or 3 weeks on a train, and then what we call, they buff it, which means they clean it. I do have a couple of pieces around the globe that are there, have been there now for 20, 25 years, all faded. But basically, most graffiti just goes within a couple of days. And therefore, it is really important to make your photos and to register what has been done. Because now we see that, for instance, articles like this from magazines of 1988 show how it was. And basically, graffiti is being conserved for and by the scene itself. As colleges and universities, especially the faculties of art history, have forgotten about the art of graffiti because it was not considered art. And now all of a sudden, ooh, it's been ephemeral. Ooh, what do we know about it? Ooh, nothing. So now they're looking for teachers to teach about graffiti. Now you understand how I rolled into that position. I've curated a couple of historical graffiti exhibitions, one at Amsterdam Museum, one at the Groninger Museum. And I work together with the Dutch Graffiti Library, who is a very, very important archive about Dutch graffiti and the connection between New York and Dutch graffiti. These are actually the graffitis before we had New York influences. So this is Dr. Red, a punk writer from like 1978. He died at the age of 21 by an overdose of heroin, sadly. But his art now is being referred as very, very important. And this year, May, I helped the municipality of Amsterdam to conserve his last graffiti in the public space of Amsterdam South, which I will show in a minute. This is some more work by Dr. Red. And here it is. It's not even a beautiful graffiti. It says DDT 666, moet dood, must die. Because yes, the punks also had some beef in between, amongst each other. And this is the city governor, or the city part, like how you say it, I don't know, like a vice mayor for the city part of Amsterdam South, who it was his initiative, which is very, very special for a city official to really want that stuff conserved. Another project I worked on that I initiated, you might know the artist, Keith Haring, very famous. And in Amsterdam, we do have a mural painted by him in '86 that was hidden, as you see, behind the cladding on the wall. And I started a lobby to bring it back to the Amsterdam municipality, to the public. And it worked out. So I'm really happy. Here he is after he painted it. As a graffiti community without Instagram, social media, I sometimes get the question, how did you guys do it without this thing? And so I'll show you, we made our own fanzines. We made our own like Xerox copy sketches. We make our sketches, Xerox copied it, send it with normal snail mail to our friends in our network who would copy it again and send it out to their network. So we would get like a whole collection of sketches from all over the country. Then the guys who are now doing the Dutch Graffiti Library, they created a little magazine out of all those sketches. And then the next magazines came. And we would buy them, and you could get a subscription on them, and they would send it to your home. And we would also draw in each other's black books. A black book is a sketchbook, and you collect each other's work in it, but you're also making your own work. And I'm making a big jump now to a couple of years ago that graffiti now has been seen as art. And what you see here is the biennial of Venice, one of the biggest, most important contemporary art biennials in the world. And this was the first edition where they showed art that has a roots in graffiti. So on the left, on the right, there's the work by Boris Tellegen. He used to write Delta, and I'm going back some photos, because here you see work by him from the mid 80s. And now he's hanging in the biggest museum. Fast forward, Amsterdam Museum. It was a combination of graffiti art from New York, from a collection in the Museum of the City of New York. And they asked me to tell the story around that collection, how the New Yorkers came from, how their art was brought from New York to Amsterdam. Amsterdam was the first city where that happened. And then, when you make an exhibition, you got to make publications. So this is how I started publishing. And then Groninger Museum, about the history of Groningen, because I'm originally from Groningen. And they bought my work. I'm really proud to have my work in their collection, next to the famous New York graffiti artist. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of the work that I've done, and then we're done, and I'm open for questions. This is work in Almere. I'm working with wood now, like going three-dimensional. The circle is painted on the wall, and all the other elements are parts of my graffiti that I cut out, and I make a new composition with it, and I paint it on wood, and I cut it out and hang it from change. This is Museum van Loon at the canals in Amsterdam, 17th century preserved canal house that was owned by rich merchants that sailed the seven seas back then. Work for the Dance Academy in Amsterdam. Old work on the abandoned buildings in my part of town. New York. The Berenkuil. You're going there after this this lecture. New York. Nowadays I'm old and I'm a mother. I have a lot of responsibilities, but back in the days I would definitely climb down the train tracks and write my name. It was dangerous, as you see. You can get killed. It's time to end.
Thank you very much, Aileen.
You're welcome.
Thank you for enlightening us, and thank you for all the colorful pieces we saw. Are there any questions out of the audience? We have a catch box. He will throw it, and if you're good enough, you will catch it. Well, I have one question. Oh, yeah, yep, the dude there.
Hello. Is this a speaker? Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I was wondering how much, because I know in art there's like a lot of ideas about color theory and composition, but because it's sort of a very organically developed thing, like, was there a lot of inspiration from you know, more museum works, yeah, like more classical art, and then in that, or did it just come up organically, like different? Yeah.
I love your question, but in graffiti, I'm sure that not so much influence was from the regular art world, because a lot of these kids that invented graffiti and that developed these styles, they just didn't have access to like the museums and any cultural institutions, because the budgets for that were all cut away. So their inspiration came from cartoon books. They would paint like Superman next to their piece, and they would take the clouds around their lettering from cartoon books or Marvel comics. And later, when they were invited themselves to show in museums, I'm sure that's where like some cross-contamination started happening. And speaking for myself and for my generation of artists that have roots in graffiti and are working in the normal art world now, yes, absolutely, a lot of inspiration. Like my personal inspiration are painters like Frank Stella, or sculptors like Donald Judd that I've seen in the museum. But then maybe it's white privilege. I was raised in Europe in a middle class family, so my father did take me to the museum every week when I was a kid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's time, or maybe one question, very urgent one. Then I would like all of you to want to go to the...
We have one more question.
Oh, I didn't see it. Oh, the guy there, yes.
What are your personal ethics in terms of applying graffiti on buildings?
What are my personal ethics when it comes to?
Applying graffiti on buildings. Like, would you just apply them everywhere?
Oh,
only
no.
abandoned buildings, or only with like...
I do have a bit of ethics. Of course, like as I said, like we're only applying some paint on a surface which can be cleaned. But when I started writing, my parents were really they were okay with it, and they also really stimulated my art because they saw it as art. But I had to promise, and I still keep that promise. I'm not painting on any house of prayer, any house of worship. I'm not painting on monumental buildings. And I'm not painting on other people's art. So those are the ethics.
Those are good ethics. Don't write over other people's art. And maybe we're going to see that crime, that non-ethical thing, there in America. We assembled there. And once again, thank you very much,
thank
Aileen.
you.
And thank you. Hope to see you next week.